presumably still negotiating the parking in Oxford. With all the scientists in the world, they haven't managed to work that one out yet. I think it's a fairly common experience. My name's Neil Stewart. I'm going to chair this and try and take you through this afternoon's programme. I'll explain the format. This is a broadcast programme. There are some people watching this live at the moment, and so you can wave to friends and family. I have to tell you that, in fact, in this form of narrowcasting, the live audiences are usually relatively small. But then afterwards, we do get them up to several thousands, and we call it narrowcasting. And gripping though we all are, it's not an entertainment channel, and really people only watch it if it's their day job. But you will all have access to the material afterwards, and the material is designed to be used for training, discussion, provocation, circulation in the new world of the interweb. Our most successful adventures in this have had audiences in excess of 25,000 when we were doing Michael Gove with the Times Higher, and over 100,000 when we were doing live broadcasts on the business pages of The Independent. But it is still narrowcasting, and it is recorded. So everything that you say is on the record. So it's probably worth reminding people of that as we begin. I'm going to make a few introductory remarks. The first thing I want to do is to say that we're not expecting a fire drill. So if you hear a fire alarm, it's for real, and you should follow the little green signs out and assemble outside. If I can check that people on the platform at least turn their mobile phones off. The rest of you are free to tweet. There will be other people, I suspect, drifting in as they fight their way through Oxford. We have an apology from Peter Larange, whose flight was cancelled. He will be here tomorrow, and I am trying to figure out how to find a space for him in the programme, partly because we also want to be able to record his comments. So could I start off by making a few comments about today's programme and the programme that we're going into tomorrow, looking at the future of business and education in the UK. And today, in particular, we're going to try and look at business studies, business management, and business schools. I'm extremely pleased that we have Peter Cheese from the Chartered Institute as our first speaker, because I wanted an outsider's view, if I can put it that way, even though he also sits on the board of BPP. There are very big changes coming, and I'm not sure that everyone in higher education is fully aware of them or the motivations behind them. A little bit of history. In the tradition of business schools, I'll tell some stories. About 10 years ago, we were contracted by both the CBI and the British Chambers of Commerce to run their big annual events. And their problem was that they couldn't get business to attend their business conferences. And we won the business on the basis of a presentation that said, your problem is that nobody is in business. Business is a generic term that seems to cover everything, is used in academic debates. But in fact, most people in reality work in transport, IT, hospitality, travel. And if you give me any one of those topics, as they did with transport, and you give me a Prime Minister like Tony Blair, we can fill a room with 1,000 people. And that's really a story about understanding segmentation and sectors and industries. And it's always occurred to me that the universal university model, if I can put it that way, finds it difficult to have a conversation with lots of local businesses, etc. And this has been something that's been a cause of anxiety in government back into the 90s. I was originally a special advisor to Neil Kinnock. I shared an office with Charles Clarke for about 10 years. But I was involved in drafting the original training levy proposals, which never saw the light of day. But the one big supporter that we did have, of course, was Michael Heseltine, who has been a consistent fan of what he saw as the German model. Business becomes engaged, companies become engaged when they've got some skin and some money in the game. And education institutions are forced to respond. So why is this a problem? Because obviously there's an anxiety at the moment. The Association of Business Schools, 3 years ago, commissioned a major report endorsed by Heseltine and Lord Young. And it basically said, while everything was going swimmingly, and we'd had fantastic growth from 250,000 students in business schools to over 350,000, nonetheless, their missions were not discrete, not focused, and there was a discontent or a disconnect with the world of work. We did a lot of the early work with Steve Smith on employability of students, and again, much horror at these kinds of terminologies. Getting them work ready, was it even part of the mission of a university, which we'll talk more about tomorrow? Less of a debate, perhaps, in business schools and business and management. But one of the things I learned working for the Association of Business Schools is the difficulty of getting even people who work in business schools to accept the idea of business schools themselves. I remember phoning round for a major conference and having an earful from people who said that they were professors of law or professors of management, and they didn't have a business school. That was an abhorrent construct of the marketing department of their university. At the same time, the dean of one business school was complaining bitterly to me that she had to give £45 million of her money earned from her students back to the Central University Fund. And that probably narrows it down to 4 or 5. But they've been huge, you can't use terms like cash cows, but huge areas of growth, and yet there's a considerable discontent there. And now we have the training levy coming in, which I assume if it gets through today's meeting at Chequers will be definitely confirmed. There's been various wobbles over the summer. And that will change things as well. A whole set of new buyers, if you like, will be in the market, informed buyers who will be much less tolerant of poor teaching, lack of connection to particular industries, and various other things. And also they'll be looking for value for money and group deals, many of which exist already. Interestingly, in a lot of business schools, there's a plethora of master's degrees and things, some of which are designed to be more bespoke than people are able to do with the MBAs. But the really big question will be what happens if the student's attitude changes. I think it has been an extraordinary period, and another confession, I'm afraid, I am an ex-NUS president from about 35 years ago, and even then we were complaining about the quality of teaching. But it is extraordinary how tolerant and willing people have been to dip into funds and to run up significant debts to fund what is seen as the most important transition for key members of their family. And whether that will be sustained, we don't know, but we're coming to a period when there's likely to be a considerable challenge. So one thing I did want to say is that what this conference and these 2 events are about, it's not about research in the sense of big science. That's a subject that if we get into it, we will all, I think, go completely mad. There is a big success story there, a lot of which I think is a tribute to Lord Sainsbury and the work that he did, and you can see that coming around. But even there, the work of the National Council for Universities and Business about mapping what future demand is is a bit more near market, and I think the work that they're doing is very important and will bear fruit. So that's the problem that we're trying to chew with. It doesn't feel like a problem. Universities and business schools feel prosperous from the inside, but from the outside, there is some high level of discontent and a worry about productivity and effectiveness and creating new businesses. And therefore, I was very pleased that Peter agreed to be the first contributor today, because in the fine Scottish tradition, you know, woods empower the gifty gie us to see ourselves as others see us, as Burns said. And Peter has been at the Chartered Institute since 2012, has a long record of working in these areas, and as I mentioned, has also taken a post at BPP, which is one of the interesting alternative providers, as they're called, although I think the language of that will evolve. So to start us off, Peter, over to you, and then we'll have a further contribution and some reflections, and then we'll open it up to a discussion.
Thank you, Neil.
Okay.
Sit here, or?
Whichever you like, really.
Well, we're a small
you're comfortable.
Group,
yeah.
But actually, why don't I just sit here? And I need to know which camera to look at.
It's all right. The camera up there, the best thing is just to look at the audience.
Kind of wave, I'll look at the audience. But a great pleasure to be here in Oxford. And thank you, Neil, for inviting me along. As you said, I've had a long interest in these sorts of subjects. I spent many years at Accenture, consulting with all sorts of businesses and sectors around the world. And the last 7 years I was there, I ran their global consulting business around people and talent and change management and leadership and all those sorts of incredibly important themes. Today, as you highlighted, through my work as the Chief Executive of the CIPD, I spend a lot of time with business schools. I talk at a lot of business schools. We accredit a lot of business schools' programs around HR management. I'm continuously trying to encourage business schools to think about the kind of people dimensions of business, because if I'm honest, I think historically, we have not paid anything like enough attention to the people side of business. Now, why is that important? Why is it even more important that we do that? Well, just to take a brief step back and sort of think about where we are in the development of work and the kinds of skills that we're going to need in the future. I mean, I think have been observing, along with many others, that we're perhaps at a bit of an inflection point in business. Huge amount of things changing. Globalization in the economy, much more uncertainty everywhere we look. Brexit throwing a big spanner in the works as well. And in that world, you know, what becomes really important to business is agility and adaptability. It's no longer about, well, I can create a 20-year or 15-year or 5-year strategy. Yeah, direction I need to know where I'm going, but I've got to be able to adapt and I've got to be agile. And to do that, I've really got to engage my people. I've got to listen to my employees more. I've got to find innovation wherever it comes from and in my organizations. At the same time, demographics, Neil, you touched on younger generations and aspirations, expectations of younger generations. I mean, Gen Y was kind of studied to death, and I still get big reports telling me what Gen Y think about, and I think, hold on a second, we're probably, I don't know, 50%, certainly in the next 5 years, 10 years, 70% of the workforce will be Gen Y or younger. So whatever it was that Gen Y was bringing to the workforce is already happening, and indeed Gen Y have brought a lot of things to organizations, you know, different sense of things like purpose. I think corporate social responsibility has grown with a lot of impetus from younger generations saying, you know, we want businesses to be responsible. Business and working in business is not just about how much I get paid, it's about what I can contribute. And how does that business play its part in building better societies and communities? And thank goodness they're asking those kind of questions. So demographics is a big change, and now, of course, we're talking about Gen Z. I often talk about my own children. I've got 2 Gen Y daughters and a Gen Z daughter, and there's just definitely a difference with the Gen Z daughter. She is completely obsessed by technology. She suffers not only from FOMO. If any of you have got young children, you recognize what FOMO is, right? Which is? Fear of missing out. What's FOBO? Fear of being offline. Or, to extend the thought, so you've got generational changes, but to extend that thought of FOBO, the other big change that is driving our future is technology, and in particular things like artificial intelligence. So FOBO is also now being to describe fear of becoming obsolete. And it's somewhere in these august halls, I think it was from Oxford Business School, where Osborne and Frey, two academics, produced a very well-cited report working with Deloitte on the future of jobs, where they said that 47%, it was a very precise academic number, 47% of jobs that we do today could be automated in the next 10 years. And that what is really different about technology now from what we had in the past is it's no longer just about automation of processes and taking away administrative tasks. It's increasingly about high-skilled jobs and about high cognitive skilled jobs. So we end up increasingly looking at a future of work which is going to be very, very different. What jobs we all do, and you said, Neil, it's an increasingly important debate for governments and others. What are the jobs we're going to be doing in the future? Because if we don't understand that, then what skills are we building for? But it's very hard to determine. I mean, in my conversations with the government on this sort of thing, I say, when they say what jobs we're going to be in the future, what are we going to be doing? I say, I have no idea. But what I do know is they're going to be different from what we do today. And what that means in terms of skills, particularly job-related skills, is there is a stronger imperative for businesses to drive those kind of job skills, arguably than we've had in the past. And business, historically, I think has taken too much of a view that we need to be able to hire oven-ready employees straight out of business schools or out of university. And then we've had this long debate about so-called STEM skills, which is frankly a proxy for, for reducing the number of graduate applicants I have to find what I think I might need. I don't think it's just about STEM skills at all. If you look at some great work that the OECD did on this a number of years ago, they talked about the future of skills being very, very different things. The ability to, all this sort of critical thinking skills. You needed the great analysts, people who could take lots of different sources of information, make sense of it. The great communicators who could communicate ideas and share ideas and influence thinking because of that. The great localizers who could take lots of big ideas which might be relevant in other places and apply them in the context which is relevant to their business. In other words, what we're really starting to need to focus on are what some in the past have described more of the soft skills than the hard skills. And if the soft skills are about an ability to connect, to communicate, to collaborate, to share, to learn, and all those sorts of vital elements of what we need today and will need more of the future, then we need to think more about these soft skills than we have in the past. Another one I put on the table for you is resilience. We talk a lot now in a very fast-changing world with a lot of uncertainty and a lot of things happening, and you've got to be able to experiment and take risks. And if you're not resilient and not prepared to confront failure along with success and treat those two imposters the same, whoever said that, somebody very learned will tell me, then you will not learn. I mean, we learn most from our mistakes. So resilience is a very important construct as well. So, as I said, when you look at a kind of future of work and you look at the kind of core skills that we need, then businesses have got to work more with academia and business schools in particular to say, okay, it may not be all the job skills, they're not sure what they're all going to be, but I can tell you what I will need, and I will need more of these kind of soft skills, critical thinking skills, project management skills, and all these other things. And I also want to see business leaders who are much better trained in what I started with, which is understanding people. There is no business that I'm aware of that doesn't employ, of any particular scale or size, that doesn't either employ people or have to interact with people, and yet somehow the paradigm of work over the last 20, 30, 40 years has been very much one of command and control, of process and of rules. As somebody said to me the other day, it's like we treated human beings as bad robots. In other words, we're going to design a process and we're going to put a human being in it and then we're going to write all these rules, because the problem is with human beings is they don't obey all the rules and they do have these things called behaviors, which are not always the things we want. Well, does that get the best out of people? Of course it doesn't. Does it engage them? Of course it doesn't. Does it create more stress in the workplace? Absolutely. Does it encourage things like voice and saying, all right, I've got some autonomy, I've got some say in what's going on here, and I will contribute as a result of that? And these are the kinds of paradigms that have to change in the world of work as well. And then finally, I think there's this other really, really important point, which is where and how we're going to be working. The growth of the so-called gig economy. I'm sure you've heard about that. Uberization is now a verb, I believe, in the Oxford English Dictionary, which says that people more and more are choosing different ways of working. So the old paradigm that said, it's okay, we're all going to join some big organization, that big organization will look after my training and skills development, because that's what big organizations do or should do. Well, if more of us are working for ourselves or in micro-enterprises where we do not have the resources or the focus or sometimes even the energy to say, well, I've got to train these people, or that these people who are working for me are contracted, so they are working literally on a gig, then where is the incentive for the employer to train these people? Which begs a very big question, which is who is going to train these people? So if people are moving around more between jobs, and those jobs themselves are changing, and we're going to be working longer, then there's a very big set of fundamental questions to be asked by government, by educationists, by business. We've got to think about welfare systems and a lot of other things that say, all right, so what are the support mechanisms for people that are moving between jobs, need to upskill and reskill, maybe not employed, but anybody's going to look after that skills development, and you move into ideas like the flex security models and other things which have been experimented with in other parts of Europe. So we are, as I briefly said, I think, at a real inflection point of thinking, and I passionately believe we've got to work on these agendas together. You know, the role of business schools in this, in helping to research and understand them at one level, these big trends and themes, and at another level, of course, helping us to build the kinds of skills, working more closely with businesses, to build the kind of skills we need, not just today, but in the future. And as I said, it's going to be much more about the soft skills than necessarily teaching me the details of financial management, which I don't deny is important, but I would also say, you know, we need to be teaching this stuff at school, and not having to pick it up at university and say, do you understand the basics of how a business runs? Isn't that a fundamental skill we should be teaching all our young people, particularly we're saying the growth of entrepreneurs and micro businesses, and most of them fail because they don't understand these things? So, as I said, my message would be, it's an extraordinary time, I think, to be in business. There is a lot changing, there's a lot of opportunity, but there are also a lot of threats. And our nation, and the productivity and competitiveness of our nation, depends on education and business working perhaps more closely together than they have in the past, but with a more fast-paced way of working, all the way from research through to what we teach, and how business schools can help, not just with the entry level of graduates, but through the lifelong learning processes that we need so much more of, whether it be exec ed or anything else. And those, I think, are our agendas. And I applaud you, Neil, for pulling together events like this so we can debate these sorts of very broad-ranging themes.
Okay, so what I want to do is take some questions and queries to Peter and some discussion around that before we go on to Roxanne. Can I ask you one question? In a number of discussions that I've had with senior HR and development people, there is now a body of opinion that says that they can identify the talent at 18 and would rather engage with the talent at 18 than run the risk of waiting for them to be spoiled.
Yeah.
And in fact, there are employers who are taking that attitude, and it seems that some of the levy reforms might open that up more. But have you got a comment on that point of view?
I have, Neil, because there's a contrary point of view that says for many employers 18 is too young. It's interesting, we are, and the levy is going to drive more of this, of course, a lot more businesses encouraging or creating apprenticeship programs. Interestingly, not just at entry level, but right through. But if I take the entry level challenge, then a lot of businesses saying, yeah, but the problem is when I get an 18-year-old, they often really are lacking these core employability skills. And although it's frankly, for many people, a very expensive way to build employability skills if you're not sure what you're going to do to go to university and build up what is now one of the biggest debts of young people in any developed nation. For businesses, they find often there's quite a risk in taking an 18-year-old. And hence, in part, I think, and partly also because of the arguably oversupply of graduates, it's been a lot easier for business to say, you know what, I'd rather have a graduate, or I'd rather have an Eastern European worker who might be 24, who's got probably not just 1 degree, but 2 degrees, who's come to the UK to work here hard, to earn some money to send back home, and is just going to get on with the job. And so, but there are lots of dynamics to this whole point as well, because we might get into this kind of mismatch of qualifications of the workforce and the nature of work, because it's one of the big drivers of productivity. But it's not to shine or point the finger at education and say, well, you got it all wrong, because business itself has not invested enough in training and developing people. It's taken these very broad-based views of how to recruit people, saying, I'd rather just have a graduate or a STEM skill, versus saying, no, you know what, an 18-year-old who comes in with some of these basic attributes, who's got a good attitude to work, who I put in an apprenticeship, will actually then learn the skills I need and is much more likely, interestingly, to stay with that job than say, well, I'm a graduate, I'll do that for a year, but then I want your job, right? And I'll give you some examples of this. The BBC really were dragged kicking and screaming by the previous HR director into the idea that they should have apprenticeships. The BBC was not a traditional 18-year-old employer. Not only did it like graduates, it particularly liked Oxbridge graduates. And it really wasn't very good, despite the nature of being a media broadcaster where you would think, diversity is an important thing, an attribute of its own workforce. It wasn't very good at this stuff. So then they started to recruit 18-year-old graduates, and they placed them in some of the departments, and then the department heads, after about 6 months, started saying, you know what, I want more of these 18-year-olds, because they come in here, they don't have a big attitude, they just want to get on and learn, they are grateful for the opportunity, and they are loyal to a fault in terms of sticking with me and the things I ask them to do. So, as I said, you can look at this from kind of two ways, can't you? You can look at it from, I think there's a great opportunity and benefit to apprenticeship programs that bring 18-year-olds into work, but we have to recognize sometimes warts and all. And from the other side, I think we've got to get businesses still to open up their minds, to recognise that that is a good route for people into work. They need to be encouraging it. The levy's going to make them do more of this stuff. And I think the outcome could be quite positive if we get it right.
Okay, comments and questions on what Peter's had to say? There are microphones, and if you could say who you are and...
Thank you very much for this good introduction. My name is Olivier Brenningmeier. You mentioned two skills, or one fear and one skill. The skill you mentioned is resilience, to which I fully agree is terribly needed. But young people have a fear of missing out, or a fear of being left online. Yeah. Isn't that actually a contradiction? The fears cancel out the ability to be resilient.
Yeah, it's an interesting point. I mean, I think, yes, you can absolutely look at things like this, and a lot of more research emerging on the Gen Zs, the digital natives, how being in an online world is affecting their thinking, are they becoming more risk averse? There was some very interesting research in Sweden, which was quite disturbing, about the levels of depression amongst young people, because they're trying to present through social media this wonderful world they live in, their wonderful lives. And therefore, anything that is a threat to that, they tend to distance themselves. I mean, even going back to the Students' Union, the NUS, the debate's going on in Oxford about rejecting, some of the things of the past, like, statues of Cecil Rhodes. There's a lot of debate about, are young people just growing up in a world where they want to isolate themselves from a lot of reality and kind of reposition a world that works for them. And it's a debate that will continue, but I think that, combined with what for many has been a trend in education, where we're not allowed to say that somebody's failed and they've got to get it right before they can progress, is also a perception a lot of people have in business. So how you teach resilience is a really, really interesting question. But I am seeing, I'm taught the head teachers too, and I'm seeing this coming onto the agenda of schools more. We've got to teach our children about failure, what it means to fail. It's not the end of the world, that you can learn from, you've got to pick yourself up and move on. But I think, we would both agree, in a world that is changing so rapidly, we have to understand what may be making young people less resilient, or maybe they're just coming into a world which it has got so much change that their level of resilience has to be higher than previous generations. But whatever it is, I think it's a very, very fundamental skill. We cannot have people so stressed out, as some of these studies are showing, that they're rejecting things that they can't understand or not part of their convenient world view, and then get into the world of work and find it's all different.
Okay.
And that's a very challenging question for us.
Okay. Mike, if you can say where you're from as well.
Sure. Mike Molan, I'm the Dean of the Business School at London South Bank. I just wanted to go back to the issue of apprenticeships, because I'm sure we've all been through various incarnations of employer engagement and attempts to get better links between universities and businesses. There's a serious plan and serious money behind apprenticeships now, so I think this is likely to go further. But I just wondered what the thinking was around the extent to which there is still a bit of snobbery and prejudice around the idea of apprenticeship. And I'm old enough to sort of remember, grammar schools and secondary moderns, and boys who were good with their hands went to the secondary modern. And what are the chances of us shaking off this idea that apprenticeships are for also-rans? Yeah. And the extent to which 18-year-olds will see it as actually not like going to uni, and therefore the thing is kind of stillborn.
Very, very important questions, Mike. I mean, if you look at the trend over the last, whatever it's been, 20, 30 years in terms of apprenticeships, we've dropped off on apprenticeships. We weren't bad, but not as good as many of our continental cousins. But it's dropped off significantly, and now we're trying to reverse that trend. And it's in the teeth of, it started with Tony Blair and his mantra of education, 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 that we should have half our young people going to university, which is pretty much where we're at. We're very close to it. And now you've then got a perception all the way from schools and school teachers that says success is about going to university, for parents saying success is about going to university, and for young people saying success is about going to university. And that whether it's apprenticeship or anything else, somehow if I don't do that, then where am I? So you got that, as you said, a kind of cultural backdrop, which we really have to work very, very hard to overcome. What the government's been doing, so it's talking about this 3 million target. There's a huge danger it just becomes quantity versus quality. We can already see a massive growth of level 2 apprenticeships. Well, how's that going to help? Unless we can show, certainly if you want to contrast with university education, that you can really see progression to an apprenticeship up through higher and advanced levels of apprenticeship with the potential crossover into academic qualification, if that's what I want, which is what happens in Germany and many other countries. We have two systems that really do fight each other in this country in terms of QAA and QCF and all these sorts of other mechanisms. So all the way, as you said, from how do we shift the rhetoric through schools, from primary age probably onwards, through parents in a wider cultural discourse or societal discourse about different routes into work, the validity of these different routes of work, through to being able to really show that in the apprenticeship system, both through how it works with business schools, how it works with businesses, that you can show progression, and that we do not end up, which is a huge danger, the unintended consequence of this apprenticeship level, we've done quite a lot of research on it, is that it'll be a flight to quantity, and businesses, rather than creating new opportunities, simply rebadging what they already do. And we can already see it happening. So you've got that concern as well, so that hardly opens up new opportunities. And as I said, this lack of really understanding progression on apprenticeships. And I think, I'm sure a number of you from universities here are working on these ideas of degree apprenticeships, which are really, really important, and I think could work well, because that shows, again, the progression, then the crossover into more academic qualification, if that's what you want to accomplish, but that we've got to find a more flexible way of doing that. It can't be, well, I did my level 5 or level 6, and now I've got to do a full degree. How do we make those two systems work together? And I think it's as much up to us as any regulator, frankly, to figure that out.
Malcolm?
Malcolm Gillies, a retired gentleman.
I love that.
The way you're describing this issue still has something of the ring of the old nation state in a world of increasing mobility and a world when a lot of people want to come to Britain. That's what Amber Rudd is talking about in France in these days. Isn't it a better business deal, I mean, just in how you spend money, to enhance the migration you've just praised with those Eastern European people with the qualifications, the experience and the attitude, and not worry so much about spending 5 or 10 years of training a local population when that will cost so much more and in fact cost them so much more?
Yeah, that's an interesting point, Michael. I've worked a lot with, as my time as a consultant, with lots of different businesses, looking at maps of the world where you can find talent. Most businesses really are not looking at geographic boundaries. They're just saying, look, if I can access good talent in this country, I will locate myself here and I will access that talent. We all know, we've seen from endless numbers of surveys that over the last years that CEOs and businesses are worrying more and more about access to skills as their primary thing. If I can't get the people, then I'm in trouble. So, yes, I think you could take a much more pluralistic, global view of the world and say, you know what, if this country can be competitive and successful and attract good people, which it's historically been able to do, I'm a massive believer in diversity. That's where innovation comes from, all these other things. And if we can continue to attract good people with good skills, what's wrong with that? There is the debate, as you know, which has come a lot through some of the Brexit discussions, about are these migrant workers competing against Brits for the same jobs? And the evidence of that is not particularly overwhelming that they are. I mean, at one level, there are, sad to say, a lot of jobs that migrant workers seem to be prepared to do that Brits aren't. And I'm not just talking about fruit pickers in East Anglia. You go talk to logistics companies. They can't hire truck drivers. Go to the construction industry. They can't hire, there aren't enough young people wanting to do traditional trades. Yeah, I mean, honestly, if I was starting out today, I could have a £40,000 debt by going to university, or I could become a plumber, and now I have a job for life. So, but I think the bias, again, to go back to the point about young people and what they're being encouraged to do from school on, the bias towards university has also deflected them away from these kinds of jobs, and then given them an expectation, you know what, you should be you're a graduate, you should come into a graduate job. Research we did last year as the CIPD suggested almost 60% of graduates in this country are doing not graduate jobs, and I'm being very careful in my definition here, because we are today defining, and businesses have defined many jobs as graduate jobs, where you don't really need to be a graduate. It's just because that's my, back to the earlier point about recruiting 18-year-olds. It's easier, and there are a lot of them, to recruit a 21-year-old graduate, whether the job requires a graduate or not. So I think your wider point is an interesting one. We're going to see this debate run and run, as you know. I was listening to Theresa May was at Chequers today, first time after the summer recess, trying to figure out what the hell they all meant by Brexit. Brexit means Brexit, yeah, but what does Brexit mean? And the big debate at the heart of it, I think most people are concluding, is migration. But that is I think it's been a very distorted view of what we think about migration. The reality is that the majority of migrants into this country are not coming from the EU, and most of the EU migrants are generally helping businesses to do what they need to do.
Well, there's no doubt the European pool has worked extremely well for UK business. It's this big issue of those left behind. And even in the 1990s, people like Patricia Hewitt at the IPPR were writing about the dangers for young white males who had no qualifications. Yeah. But they were absorbed into the Blair boom economy that went right up until the banks crashed. And really, the Labour government didn't address that side of it. Tomlinson and diplomas were an attempt, but they ran up against their own kind of university snobbery. But now those that have left behind have had the revenge. So the political classes know that they have to address this. Yeah. And I think the levy is part of that. And Heseltine and others have always been very strong on it. But it does need to be able to reach up into colleges and things a bit more, if I may say, in the Scottish tradition of the further education colleges and the people who are working at non-university level, which has a slightly stronger tradition and respect. And I think that's quite interesting.
Yes, and sort of just briefly on that point, Neil, and in the Scottish system, I think less early specialisation. We force people in the English system to specialise so early when they're so young. And that's why I was emphasising this point about these core skills. We need much more of them, and worrying less about whether I got 3 A levels at some very specific subjects, which I may or may not take forwards into my future career.
Okay. Other comments and feedback? A question, maybe actually, Mike, since I know that you're a business dean. When I was working for the Association of Business Schools, and the MBAs were growing like topsy, one of the statistics that completely took me by surprise was that 86% of the full-time MBAs being studied at UK business schools were being studied by overseas students. And that when you looked behind it, you could see that UK business had been disconnecting from business schools, either because they wouldn't pay for it or the time off, etc., was inflexible, and they were investing in lots of shorter private courses, often run by their own academics, by the way, as far as I could see. But also you began to see the problems arising in part-time education in Birkbeck and some of the Open Universities models. Just that point about, where is that disconnect? Do you have any sort of insight into it?
I think there's a couple of issues there. One is, to put it bluntly, that MBAs taken by overseas students is a really good money spinner for universities. And there's been a little bit of a race to the bottom in terms of entry requirements, in the sense that you have non-executive MBAs that are taken by people straight off degrees. And we could argue for a long time about the validity of that, but money is money, and money talks. The changes that the QAA have now made will put a stop to that, and that's going to be challenging, I think, to the business model for a lot of universities who've relied on that income. So the home market, certainly for us, has tended to be part-time, and I think there's a bigger question there, and I don't want to preempt too much what we might discuss after the break, but as a relatively new, very new business dean, looking at this with new eyes, I simply said, what's the point of an MBA? okay? And others may shoot me down for saying this, but it had slightly the whiff of supply-side economics about it. We'll teach you what we know, and we hope that you'll want it, and we hope that employers will find it useful. And I think the disconnect, in my view, has been a failure to stand outside the institution and say, what's the point of it? Why would somebody employ you with this qualification? What value are you going to add to the organisation? And I think there's been a little too much of putting a trophy on the mantelpiece and hoping that it makes you more employable. And I think there's going to be a kind of relearning curve for some organisations. They're going to have to rethink their MBA business. And that's why we're hearing, you know, in terms of some of the commentators, the idea that the MBA is dead. Well, it probably isn't, but it needs to be something completely different if it's going to survive.
Yeah, I was reading some interesting stats. And as you said, a vast number of overseas students doing MBAs in this country. But yeah, I mean, I've reflected on myself in business. I remember asking my employer, Accenture, when I was, I don't know, 25, 26, something like that. So I've been in business 3 or 4 years, said, would you sponsor me to do an MBA? And I said, no. I said, why would we? We will train you to do everything you need to know. It adds no value, further value to us. I think, however, you know, interestingly, as I talk to people who've done MBAs, a lot of them would say, well, I've done an MBA in order to make a career change. So the classic is I've worked in a particular functional field or business, and I want to go, for example, I want to go and be a consultant, or I want to go into investment banking or something like that. So some people have unquestionably looked at the MBA as their ticket to make a significant career shift. Now, whether that plays out, to your point, in reality or not is an interesting question, but I think there's some evidence of that. I also read a very interesting stat that said that 31% of global chief executives of the world's largest companies, the world's 500 largest companies, have done an MBA. Now take that for what you will. Interestingly, they were very largely from the top business schools. And that's another thing. I mean, I think it is a challenge. You know, I know I'm a big fan of schools like yours. My youngest daughter's just starting off at Oxford Brookes. I'm a big fan of that model. But I think when it comes to MBAs, it's a tight market, and everybody knows the ladders, the Harvards, the LBSs, you know, and big businesses would say, you better have got a big business degree, as it were. And that was what was evidenced by this research on chief execs. They pretty much all had come from the top 10 schools. Now, do we all need MBAs to be chief execs of large Fortune 500 companies? Well, probably not. Secondly, do we all want to be chief executives for Fortune 500 companies, or could be? No, of course not. So yeah, I think it's time to challenge some of these constructs. So what's the purpose of an MBA? From a business perspective, it's a very, very thin case whether I would sponsor it or whether I would recruit an MBA, because part of the problem, as I touched on before, is you bring in an MBA and they think they know it all. They really do. It's a bit like, you know, computer science graduates. I don't know if you're teaching computer science courses, but they come into the big tech companies, and then the tech companies say, I'm not really sure I want to hire computer science graduates because they think they know it all. And unfortunately, what they've been taught at university is out of date, because computer science of all subjects is changing so rapidly. So there's that kind of debate as well.
Okay. Before we go to our next speaker, just one, is there anyone here from further education? Because it's worth remembering that 11%, I think it is, of degrees are taught in further education colleges. A large number of them are very business focused and often perhaps more granular than in some of the universities. And I thought it was interesting that one of the first degree apprenticeships that was done was at Durham, and all the newspapers wrote it assuming it must be Durham University, when it's not. It's New College Durham, and John Widdowson will be here tomorrow. But that further education element, as the other providers, a lot of whom have kept quite close contacts with their businesses and things. Anybody, and we're aware that some universities are reviewing their franchising relationships with further education in a not very attractive fashion. Not quite monopolistic or cartel, but you know, regarding it as competition locally, and that seems to be a big issue that will come up. Has anybody got further education point of view that they would like to stick in as one of the key alternative providers to universities, if you like, if not the key?
So hi, I'm Ramita Teshpal. I'm from Bromley College. We recently merged with Bexley in Greenwich, and now we are London Southeast College. And yes, you're right that we do deliver business courses, and we deliver it with franchise with University of Greenwich and Canterbury Christ Church University. But again, I think we struggle with the bachelor's model, because there's a 3-year model we deliver, and also the foundation degrees. Our foundation degrees do really well because that's a mature market we appeal to. But again, further education colleges struggle with selling the BSc business honors courses, for example, because universities do want to charge the same fee, which is 9,000, and sometimes learners don't feel the same value. Like you said earlier, that it's all about the value. Why would they pay £9,000 and come to a further education college to get their business degree? And again, for the further education, as managing the business school for the last 3 years, I struggle with that some universities, for example, Canterbury, they have written the business course, and there's very much less we can do. It's very much driven to that target market of 18 to 21. But we have mature students who come to the business course if you already have experience in business, and we can't really play with the program a lot or change it. So I think there's need for the education, to kind of step up and have that voice in the association of business, that we can write or rewrite the business model for further education in that mature market who wants to come into business degrees, or want to do the degree apprenticeships, for example. So, for example, we bid it for our degree apprenticeships bid, so we will be working towards developing that as well. So yeah.
And have you looked at all at getting your own degree awarding powers? Because one of the fascinating things about the past 5 years is that, whatever it is, Clause 157, that would have enabled some further education colleges and others to step up and achieve university status, but they've chosen not to in most cases.
Yeah. I think the same for the past 20 years, they've chosen not to, because some programs, if you go quality assured, where we had direct numbers, the numbers dropped drastically because we were helped by the university marketing machine. So we saw drastic, so we were thinking that would that help us to have our own degree awarded by our college? Would that have the same value for the learners? But we're trying to get our FTAP powers first. So yeah, and then think of degree awarding powers. But again, it goes back to, will that give students the value? And would they see value in it?
Very interesting,
Yeah.
the marketing power of universities. Okay, well, I'd like first of all to thank Peter and to introduce Roxanne Stockwell, because there are alternative providers who have been working towards degree awarding powers. There are some that have achieved them already, and I think BPP and others are one. There's a lot of talk and hot air in the media about it, some of it a bit of a false polarization. But nonetheless, it is clear that there is space in the demand from students and from employers for alternative models and alternative providers and alternative finance ones. And one of the ones that always fascinated me was when Pearson, going into this area, they were one of the first ones that began to look at it and talk about it publicly. And we're very pleased to have Roxanne Stockwell, who's the principal of Pearson College, with us to make a contribution.
I'm not leaving, I'm just
I think it's 700 students, so, growing and significant. So, Roxanne, we look forward to your comments, and then we'll have some more discussion afterwards.
Thanks. I feel like being apparently my mic won't click on, so it's easier to deliver it from up here. Okay, so I'm Roxanne Stockwell. I'm the principal of Pearson College London, which is a separate legal entity that's set within Pearson. For those of you who don't know Pearson, it's a global FTSE 100 company. It has been through all sorts of different industries in its history. It's about 170 years old, but it's now very much focused on education. So we publish a lot of textbooks, more textbooks for universities than any other publisher in the world. Until very recently, sadly, we used to own the FT and Penguin. And we have Edexcel, which is the largest UK awarding body. It doesn't award degrees, but awards all sorts of other qualifications. And we offer a whole range of learning services, curriculum development, etc., all over the world. So that's Pearson as a whole, which is quite big, and we're a little tiny part of that. So I joined Pearson in 2011, and with the aim of setting up what would hopefully one day become a university. So we have created a separate legal entity, which is called Pearson College London. It has 2 schools within it, Pearson Business School and Escape Studios. Pearson Business School delivers various degrees around business, law, accounting, and so on. Escape Studios delivers degrees and also other types of courses around visual effects, gaming, 2D, 3D, animation, those kinds of areas. So we've got a skills shortage school, if you like, and a more kind of common school that you would see with Pearson Business School. So when I started and we were going to do this, I had to think about what sort of higher education institution was this going to be. So it was going to be the first higher education institution set up and grown from within a FTSE 100 company. And there's obviously a lot of really good universities in the UK. There was no point really in kind of like repeating what was already out there. So what we decided to really focus on, and where we thought Pearson would have something extra to contribute, was around the whole employer engagement space. So everything that we do is about knitting together employer engagement and the academic side, and bringing them together as much as possible. And I almost see it as a kind of laboratory for exploring how far can we go with employer engagement, where does it make sense, where does it add value, etc. So that's our mission really, is around that employer engagement and the academic side and bringing them together within higher education. So higher education has always been a lot about community, like if you look back over its history over hundreds of years, often a separate community from the wider society in different ways. And so one of the things that we're trying to do is to have a community that is literally set within a business, that has some links with that business, and then has links with, Pearson itself has lots of different contacts, obviously, with lots of other businesses and companies, so incorporate some of those links as well and builds other links. So it's a kind of, as close as we can get to authentic business community. So that's kind of at the nub, at the heart of what it is that we're trying to develop. Now, one of the things that I've had to think about is why we're doing this, if we're looking at it from the point of view of the institution and also from the students. And there's 3 reasons. People always jump, oh, it's employability. It's not just about employability. And maybe not even primarily about employability, which of course is a difficult word that has all sorts of different connotations around it as well. But it is, one of the key reasons is intellectual, because students who are more engaged with relevant, real, authentic business experiences, and I'm using business in its broadest possible sense, and there's a lot of studies that support this, actually do better academically, as well as obviously gaining some skills and experiences that go onto their CV. So this is not a kind of soft skills, which is a phrase that I loathe, because actually I think they're extremely hard skills. It's not a kind of soft skills addition. It's if you, as a student, if you're studying a subject area and then you have to look at how it works or doesn't work and isn't applied in a real business context, it's so complex and it's so challenging that there's a whole intellectual development that is there as well as hopefully making people much more interested in the subject as well. So that's one part. Another part is around what I'll broadly call corporate citizenship. And by that, I don't mean being a citizen of your own particular company that you're employed by, but just generally being aware of how business really shapes, and employment really shapes the whole way society works and is funded and all that sort of thing, so that hopefully you're coming out and it's not just about you and your career and can I get a job at a certain amount of money, that you have at least an understanding of how everything is interconnected, and what business does has all sorts of implications, and some of it's good and some of it's bad, and that more sort of critical view. And then the third one is around, of course, helping students with employment and their careers, and that hopefully what they will have learnt and experienced, not necessarily always taught by our teachers, but also part of the experience of being at Pearson Business School or Escape, will actually help them in their early career and going forward. So there's really 3 interconnected reasons around that. So I've been asked to share our kind of experiences on the learning and teaching side within the business school.
So when we think about employer engagement, and also, as it happens, I'm doing a doctorate in employer engagement and HE at the same time, so there's a kind of nice segue with this talk and my job and all that kind of thing. So I find all of this really fascinating as to what it means, what it should look like, what value does it have, etc. But we obviously see some fantastic employer engagement in universities around the UK. Probably in all universities, there's some really good examples of employer engagement there. A lot of it tends to be around research at the higher level, which is obviously absolutely superb in many instances. Of course, employers take on graduates, and that counts as employer engagement, according to some of the articles that I've read. And employers often offer internships or one-year type work placements. So those kinds of things are reasonably common and often done extremely well to the benefit of all the parties who are involved. But what we were interested in was trying to take that much further and see to what extent we could get the employers involved in the design and the delivery of the courses, and particularly at undergraduate level, which is what we're mostly focused on at the moment, although not exclusively, rather than at the postgraduate and PhD level, where you sometimes see it in more detail. Our kind of viewpoint was that we should involve employers as much as we can, and that we consider them as the missing professors of higher education. So you've got professors who have, obviously, a fantastic amount of knowledge, experience in whatever their area is, but there is this other whole set of people who, when it comes to the way things happen in the workplace, also have a very high level of expertise. So somehow bringing those missing professors into what it is that we're doing. So I thought I would just work through some examples of what we've been doing. We are very new. We only started in 2012 with a small single class group in 2012. So we've only been going for just coming up to 4 years, which obviously in university terms is like 5 minutes. So a lot of this is, still being very much developed. And as we go on, we hope we'll be able to do some good rigorous studies around some of it and see how the effectiveness of various initiatives work. So one of our first points was to make sure that every degree that we designed was designed with employers. So we have what we call a degree concept team, which includes employers and student representation, and of course, academic representation. So, and that they work through, not just at the end, but right from the beginning in the whole design process of the blueprint that ultimately we take to get validated and then approved by professional bodies or whatever else that might be needed. So they're involved right from the start. So our very first degree, which was a business and enterprise degree, we had BT and Cisco as our corporate leads. We had Nigel Slack, who's a very well-known professor in operations management. He was our academic lead. And we had Aaron Porter, which many of you probably know, who quite a few years ago now, well, not about 6 years ago now, was president of the NUS. So we all worked together, and obviously people from the college, we all worked together in actually designing that kind of blueprint. And it was quite a feisty experience at times. But, everyone was very happy with the result in the end, but there were some arguments and debates around roles of exams and whatnot, all that kind of thing as we went through it. One of our most recent degrees in business management, we've had people like Unilever, the law firm Bragg, Formula One, sports, etc. So a whole mix of different businesses. And the important thing here is that these are not about their employees. So these companies are not coming to design something for their employees. They are coming to contribute their expertise to a course that will be open to anyone to be able to apply. One of the things I was quite surprised about was how keen businesses were to actually contribute. In my first year, I set a target for our external relations person to bring in 3 businesses that would work with us on the design of the first program. And within 12 months, we had about 60. So we've actually found in talking to businesses that they are really keen to be involved in all sorts of different ways. And it is a great resource that business schools and universities can draw on. Our very most recent one was a series of undergraduate degrees for Escape Studios, which is the visual effects, gaming, etc. one. And that took the DCT much further. So that had people that had a whole range of different people on that from that industry. So there was Paul Francis, for example, who is the founder of Double Negative and has won 2 Oscars, and Tara Saunders, who's also on our academic board, as it happens. So we have industry on our academic board as well, who is the art director for the London studio for Sony, and Charlie Bayliss, who's the technical director for Framestore, which is the company that's done Paddington Bear and Harry Potter and those kinds of programs. So again, all these people from industry. And what we did there was we took the DCT much further. So they contributed a lot to the idea around the pedagogy. They really wanted to see what we've sort of called a studio approach, where as many of the classes as possible, the students are acting and behaving as if they are in a studio, and they're given all sorts of different industry briefs and so on throughout the degree. After designing that, that DCT then piloted that pedagogy in 2 sets of intensive 2 weeks. The first one was with recent alumni from the area. The second one was with students who were considering going into that area, but they sort of obviously crammed it right up, but they piloted that actual pedagogical approach, which involved very rapid industry briefs, quite brutal feedback, speaking of resilience, and this was all done with these people, so there were people from genuine companies in it. Before all of that went to validation, so by the time it went to validation, we tested some of that pedagogy as well, which was great having that kind of input from them. So a different kind of example is the fact that we are actually housed within a big global company. So we literally have 2 floors from in one of the main buildings in the centre of London, and actually the space has just been redesigned, and we're moving into it this week, so it's very exciting for us. And we've tried to design it to kind of look in that sort of modern cafe style now that you might see down at the BFI or the Hoxton or something like that, where if you ever go and sit there and have a cup of coffee, there are so many people carrying on business, including meetings and all sorts of things in that kind of environment, which will hopefully create, there's classrooms as well, of course, but a sort of collaborative sort of aura around that, and encourage students into that sort of collaboration that's needed as well. But also, because we're part of Pearson, students can have company-based mentors if they want to, and there's quite a few opportunities they have to present different things to different parts of the company, which is very good for them, for their own development, and invariably the company is really amazed by these students, which goes back to the 18-year-old versus, someone who's already a graduate. There are a lot of talented people at all ages, even if they haven't yet been through university. And they even get to pitch certain things. So some of them have started their own micro businesses, and they've pitched some of that into Pearson. I was talking to one student yesterday who was pitching some kind of artificial intelligence idea into Rod Bristow, who's like second from the top at Pearson. And various other ways of interacting there, which I think is really good for the students' experience in lots of ways. So another tack that we've taken, and I'm just cherry picking a few things that I thought might be of interest, is our admissions process. So we did find ourselves kind of forced into setting an A-level tariff, because if you don't have that, you kind of look completely out of kilter with everyone else. But actually we have a twin track approach. So if people have the A-level tariff, then that's fine, although all of them have to have an interview. But the approach that ideally we'd rather see everyone come through is, it's had various names, I'll call it an assessment day at the moment, which involves several tests. So there's an online test on cognitive skills and critical thinking and core skills, as well as a written piece, as well as an interview. And then obviously they also meet some people from the college, some staff and students, etc. The idea is for it to gently reflect an assessment day that you might see as a graduate, not as sort of harshly as what they might be, but what we're trying to do there is to identify potential without necessarily referring to A-level scores, previous educational achievement. And it's been really interesting because we've just started to get people, our first sort of graduates through. And so we've had another part of Pearson do some analysis of the data around some of that. And what we have found is the best predictor, remember this is for getting through the course and how they do on the course, because we haven't really been going long enough to look at long-term employment impact. But the best predictor of the 5 different things that we might look at, which is the A-level scores, the interview, a core skills online test, a critical thinking online test, and the written piece, the best one was the core skills, which is what we consider to be the easiest test. But for some reason, in that test, that has the best kind of correlation with how students will end up doing on the program. And that became very interesting because in our 3rd year, the BBC approached us to do a degree apprenticeship with them, and they were really keen on not going automatically for A-level scores, partly because of this Oxbridge thing that we were talking about before, and getting a more diverse view. So they wanted to not look that at all. We could talk through our assessment day route, and they basically took all of that and added a group collaborative exercise to that as well. And we're now going into our 3rd year for that, and we've had 700 applications for only 10 places. So it must be one of the most competitive courses in the country, I would imagine. And none of that are they looking at the A-level scores. They're looking for this other way of trying to find potential to have a more diverse workforce. And the first set that started 3 years ago have now just graduated, and they've now all been confirmed that they will be going on to have an ongoing employment job with the BBC. And I don't know that we would have got there if we hadn't been doing that assessment day route. I think spotting potential in non-traditional ways is something that a lot of companies are really interested in for a whole host of different reasons. And we're obviously still, working on developing that. But that was a really interesting experience. We also have, in the delivery side, we try and make it roughly 50-50, but you have to be very flexible with employers, so it doesn't turn out exactly like this, of the sort of traditional lectures and seminars that they have in classrooms, and then workshops or industry days where they, whenever possible, actually go to the premises of the company, and sometimes the company comes to us, and it might be a whole day or a couple of days, or it might be a series of workshops over a few weeks, where the company essentially will give talks and set challenges, and the students will have to they might have to prepare a marketing plan or do a basic design of an app or whatever it is that might be, but something that's very real. They're engaging with the people from the business. We often have very senior people there, so that's, all of that is good experience for the students. And in the last year, for example, we've had we had a industry day with IBM, we had another one with Unilever, we had another one at Pearson, and then there's been a whole range of others. We had one at Sackville, the real estate agents, and the students helped redesign their way they did their graduate recruitment, not to get themselves jobs, but just redesign their graduate recruitment generally. And there's always some kind of activity they have to do with that, and then sometimes that carries on. This is naturally, and this sort of brings me onto the extracurricular. Not all of this is credit-bearing. Some of this is extracurricular as well, but it's still part of the learning experience. So at the moment, for example, some of the students have created an app which is around basic language phrases that people might need in refugee camps in multiple languages, and they've now gone in to pitch that idea to Google, which wasn't the company that we were originally working with. I don't know how far that will go, but even that is a fantastic experience for the students to have gone through. And we also have various social enterprise things. My favourite one is one that we set up in the first year. I say we, the students set it up. And it was a social enterprise project in India that was helping a number of farming wives whose husbands had committed suicide, because there had been a whole range of problems in that particular region. And what they were doing was, what the students were doing, were working with the ladies involved to create these various products out of cotton, which they're then marketing to various businesses back in London. And obviously it's a great thing for the students to be involved in. It's great to be doing something to help. But also the students have passed it on each year. So each year they've passed it on to the next set of students and then on to the next set of students, which I really like that because that then links with the corporate citizenship side and helping contribute to younger students coming in after that. So that's particularly one of my favourites. And then finally, I thought I'd just touch on two that we are in the process of doing. So these are highly experimental, haven't started yet. One of them is, we have quite a lot of students who are interested in entrepreneurship, and we're going to be setting aside some space in the business school for an incubator. And this was all a student's idea, and we're having it as student-led as possible, choosing a startup ed tech company that will be able to have that space there free for a year. And the idea is that in return, that there is some engagement with the students throughout the year. And from the students' point of view, they're able to watch and observe and engage with what's happening in the incubator throughout the year, which it could be anything, it could be completely chaotic. I don't know yet what it will look like. But it's kind of cute because it's a business within a business school within a business. So we've got this whole Russian doll thing going that we quite like. So that's interesting. So instead of having a visiting professor or an artist in residence that you might have, we're having our own little startup company in residence. And the students are going to choose the startup company, etc. And then the final one relates to apprenticeships. So for us, degree apprenticeships are a really good example of exactly what it is that we're committed to, bringing the two things together. And so we're obviously looking at that. And as I said, we've already got a degree apprenticeship going with the BBC. Where this September, we're starting another degree apprenticeship. This is a pilot, which we call the rotational degree apprenticeship. And that's with 6 big companies. So that's Pearson is one of them, WPP, Unilever, Direct Line, IBM, Tesco, I think that's the 6. And what they wanted, all of them are interconnected in different ways. Their clients all work together on things in different ways. It mightn't sound like they do, but they do have connections. And each of them are taking on 2 apprentices. And they start this September on a degree apprenticeship, the CMI one. And all the students will rotate around 3 of the companies during the apprenticeship. So they have the first year with their home company, then 8 months with the second company, 8 months with the third company, and the final 8 months, it takes 3 years, back with their home company again. And they will effectively move into each other's roles. Now you can imagine these 6 big companies, they've all got their own agendas, etc. But somehow, within 3 months, we managed to get them all to agree to do everything at exactly the same time, all together. Let's all hold hands and jump. I'm still quite shocked that we've done that. It's only a small group, but and they really love the idea. They really love the idea because they love the idea of their. One of the problems is if you just leave the training and education to the company, they only get that one perspective. But by moving around with 3 other places, then that's a whole different way of broadening a student's mind. That is one of the things that we expect people to come out of a degree with. All the apprentices have been chosen. We only had a very short period of time to advertise it. So when we're talking about whether young people will apply for apprenticeships, we had 228 applications in a 2-week window of advertising. So, and this was in late July, August, which I thought was amazing because everyone's away on holidays. And so personally, I think that once people start to realise degree apprenticeships, I don't know about how effective that will be with other apprenticeships, but that you don't necessarily have to make a choice between those 2 things now. You can do something where you're able to do both, and particularly if you have the opportunity to work with well-known companies, I think that you could see a quite significant status change around degree apprenticeships. And I think that's one of the reasons why the government's particularly keen on degree apprenticeships, to help try and resolve that low status view that attaches itself sometimes to apprenticeships. And it still does. I mean, even our BBC ones, who it was incredibly competitive to get into, have said that when they're talking to people at the BBC, they've sometimes had people say, oh, an apprentice, and felt as if you know, which was really interesting because, of course, they're delighted to be one, and the BBC, you know, or maybe there's some parts who didn't necessarily want them, I don't know from what was said earlier, but they clearly want that. So there is, I mean, there are still issues around that, but I think that maybe through what business schools will start doing and other parts of universities, that whole attitude will change. So there's lots more that I could talk about, but I think that was kind of touching on a few examples. And we're basically trying to see how far we can take employer engagement. We have to have all the academic side as well. I mean, we can't be validated or approved or anything with all that too. So that that kind of goes without saying. I'm saying it just in case. But how to add that and to really help with the learning experience, both from an interest point of view and hopefully in time, good career prospects. That's all.
Okay, thank you very much. It's very interesting reflection on what you were saying. It occurred to me that when I think about what's now regarded as higher education and that very close employer sector engagement, the kind of places I think of are the Royal Agricultural College, now a university. I think of Robert Gordon's in Aberdeen on the oil industry. I think of Dundee Tech with the gaming and graphics people there. But the level of employer engagement you're getting, how do you, once you've designed a course, to keep it near market, how often do you then have to refresh it? Or have you got a sort of continuous revolution going on? Because to stay near market, especially in some of the areas you described, there needs to be a constant dialogue.
I mean, I think that's a challenge. Because we're so new, the courses are still fresh. I mean, the Escape undergraduate ones start this September. So that's not something we've had to do just yet, but we're just now saying with our courses that started 3 years ago, that were not technical, so not quite the urgency that you get with technical, we need to build in a system for review. I think to really work in the technology side, you need to be looking at it every year, at least.
And are you finding in these companies that there is an existing infrastructure? I think back to Gordon Brown's ambitions about university for industry, but that tapped into a lot of companies like Ford and others who had big internal training structures, but they're not allowed to use the university word in this country. They do use it, they do call them employee universities in other countries.
McDonald's University.
Yeah.
Do you mean like a corporate university?
Well, a corporate, yeah, corporate. Are you finding that you could plug into that?
Not yet, but we're obviously very interested in the degree apprenticeship side, and we're having conversations with quite a range of companies on that. And I think that will be one of the things that comes out of the impact of a levy, is working more closely with what's already existing in their training and development sections.
Okay.
I mean, from an employer's point of view, that's where you'd start with your levy, isn't it?
Yeah. Okay, so Chris Williams is the president of Oxford Entrepreneurs, who are working with us. You've just finished your degree?
That's correct.
Running his own business while he was doing it, and the Side Business School has set up its own little incubator, of which you are the head honcho of the Game of Thrones or whatever games you're playing. Just give us a few words about what you're doing and also about what you've heard this afternoon.
No, of course. Well, thanks very much for having me today. So what would I say about Oxford Entrepreneurs? We are the largest student-run entrepreneurship society in Europe. We've been around since 2002. We are affiliated with the university, but not a part of the university, which is quite important to make, very important point to make. And I think it's important to say, because I've heard a lot about these programs not providing soft skills, but I think when you go to university, you've got to look at it more broadly. There's many student societies, some of which are run like businesses. I'd say Oxford Entrepreneurs does. Before Oxford Entrepreneurs, I ran RAG, which was mentioned before. We turned over a profit in 1 year of £100,000, and compare that to other RAGs, that's nothing. Loughborough turned over a profit of over £2 million. So you can get these skills by joining these societies, and most students do. I think now students are paying more money. They are really looking to develop these soft skills. And that's why they come to us. And when you were talking before about the workshops that are run at the university, these are the sorts of things we provide. And the businesses we talk to, this week I've been talking to Accenture, Skyscanner, Newton Consulting. They are providing these workshops, so they are coming to us as well. So I think that's something to really pay attention to. And also what I found really interesting about the talks Peter was saying with FOMO, I think that's mainly due to the approach, the global approach that students are taking these days. You can easily apply to a university anywhere in the world. And people are looking further afield. I mean, this evening I intend to apply to universities elsewhere. This is only a one-role job. And I think because of this, people are only looking for these prestigious jobs, and that's why the apprenticeships are not necessarily jumped on straight away. I think it's something that needs to be changed, because at the moment, everyone I speak to wants to be an investment banker or a management consultant, and there's just not enough of those jobs going around. So it's something that needs to change, and the attitude we're talking about here, where a fear of failure, that's something we're always trying to overcome, but I think it's a very British thing. When I go to Silicon Valley, we don't see that. Everyone wants to fail. Failure is celebrated. So I think it's a cultural change that needs to be done, and I think it can be done at the universities, and it's something the Saïd Business School is working to do. They've just announced the Foundry, which is going to be a new project focused on entrepreneurship with an even bigger incubator than the one they've got already. So I think these thoughts are being heard and action is being taken. I mean, I am from Oxford. This is a very local area for me. Maybe this isn't something that's happening across the entirety of the UK.
Okay, questions, comments? Microphone down to the front here.
Thanks. A question for Roxanne, actually, going back to your description of working with businesses to develop courses. I've got a personal view that one of the effects of the rapid changes in higher education over the last few years is that some universities have undergone a little bit of an identity crisis, I think, and have a degree of mission confusion. And it sometimes manifests itself in internal endless debates about whether students are customers or not, for example. And I guess my point is whether you think there's any evidence that businesses are keener to work with you because you are, in fact, unashamedly a business.
Well, the businesses we work with a lot of, oh, sorry, I need to hold this thing up. They work with a lot of institutions, I think. So it's not that they're just working with us, but I do think that because the wider Pearson is a business in itself, that we do have a kind of strong understanding, or a unique insight, if you like, as to how businesses actually work. And so making arrangements with the businesses, the organisation of time, the flexibility, all those kind of things come quite naturally to us. Whereas I know from talking to them that sometimes they've found it very difficult to work with educational institutions who have very fixed times, or who will do this and who will do that. So I think that helps. And another thing that helps is that a lot of businesses want to have a link with Pearson. So that's another aspect, I think. But I know that you've got heaps. 600. Yes.
Question, comment?
Also, sorry, Simon Clements, Roffey Park. Question for Roxanne. Really just asking how you select the organisations and the businesses that you work with that contribute to the programmes. What sort of selection process? Because I think I heard that you're oversubscribed. And also the type of businesses that you're looking for, because I think the businesses that you listed were all of a type. They felt all of a type, that they were sizable BTs, IBMs, and the like. So a two-part question.
Well, we did start with larger companies, and we were very pragmatic. We started with institutions that we had contacts with, of which there is quite a few. And we would go and meet with them. I had two people who, that was their role, was to go and meet with them. You had to find people within the business who were really enthusiastic about working with you, so that became one of the criteria, if you like. And then people would then often introduce us to other people, and then to other people. So it's really worked through a kind of a network of contacts. We are now going through the process of working out what businesses to approach in terms of apprenticeships. And with that, we are looking at places we don't necessarily have any contacts with. So at the moment, we're doing some research, and ideally what we would like is to have some big businesses and medium ones and some very small startup ones. Where we don't have as much in those two categories, and that's an area that we're explicitly tackling at the moment, because I think from a student's point of view, the vast majority are employed by small places, not by the big places. And so we don't want to give them a misapprehension of what the business world is like. This is just one little bit, one small bit actually, of the business world. We do work with some SMEs, which I didn't mention, including some very small startups, partly because people wouldn't have heard of them. But the idea would be to have a balanced diet, really, of businesses across that, and that's what we're working to at the moment.
Certainly, in my experience too, I mean, I sit in lots of forums of businesses talking about apprenticeships, and it's always this usual suspect. And it's partly, I think, Roxanne, just size and scale. I mean, because they've got the big resources, they've got these big training budgets. They are the ones that are saying, oh my God, it's usually the accountants or the CFO that's walked across the corridor to the head of HR and L&D and said, oh my God, you know how much we're going to pay, therefore go sort it out. But I passionately believe also, as you said, we've got to make sure that we are bringing the smaller and mid-sized businesses into this spectrum. I think some of the big businesses are trying to work in partnership with smaller businesses as well, help them. We're also hearing big businesses talking about things like, as part of working with them, if you're part of a supply chain, there's going to be one of the conditions of working with us. So I think we've got the German Mittelstand model, things of that nature, where we connect businesses better through their supply chains and what other ecosystems. Because this is hard stuff for a small business. It's hard. A lot of these businesses never even thought about apprenticeships. So it's hard stuff, and they do need the help of big business as well.
And I think with the little businesses, it depends what you're trying to do with them. But if we were talking about apprenticeships, this is something we're looking at the moment, is what sort of due diligence do we need? In fact, on big businesses as well. But these apprenticeships will take at least 3 years. And obviously, if you're talking about startups, most fail. So how, what are you going to do if that happens, and how to try and make sure that you're choosing ones where it's a bit less likely to happen. And we're working through that. We're working through that at the moment. If it's not that though, if it's other things about helping with design, etc., then it can be open to a huge range of different types of businesses, and it depends on who is the keenest on the subject area really that you're talking about.
Just you mentioning the Mittelstand, when one of Michael Heseltine's big concerns is, and one thing that I found when I was working for the British Chamber of Commerce, is the centralised nature of HR and training. So major universities in, say, Leeds would be looking at the major employers in Leeds, a lot of which would be branch companies. The managers on the ground simply did not take those decisions. It's the Henry Kissinger, who do you call? And that applied to quite large, medium-sized businesses, that basis all over. And that disconnect was one of the most disruptive things in trying to find the answer to who a university should then go out and speak to as its local or regional business.
Yeah, it's a good point, Neil, and I think we will continue to see that. I mean, as organisations seek to try to manage some of these budgets, they will naturally tend to gravitate to more central models. But I think also L&D is changing a lot. I think, how it gets distributed through the company, meeting some of the local needs as well as some of the collective needs. I believe it should become much more strategic. A lot of it's not being thought about strategically in businesses, and then you get a very different dialogue. And of course, the nature of learning and development itself. I mean, with technology, and we talk about young generations, self-directed learning, and very, very different roles that learning and development, particularly in business, can have to play, which is more as an aggregator and a curator. Of saying, well, okay, here's some really cool stuff, how do I access it? As opposed to, and you can see them, you talk to heads of L&D and say, I start my training from scratch. Well, why on earth would you do that? Why would you write management and development programs from scratch? But they do it, and that's been the history of a lot of L&D. So I think on the other side of that equation is there's got to be a lot of rethinking of learning and development in the corporate world.
Okay, well, one last question, and then I have to wind it up.
Thank you, yes. My name's Paul Bangal, and I work both in business and in academia, and just keep interest in both. It's a question for Roxanne, actually. I'm just thinking from a student's perspective, with your sort of alternative method of teaching, what are the sort of costs involved from a student's perspective in are the courses funded, or are the students paying themselves? How do they compare in comparison to traditional degree courses?
Well, our degrees are designated for student loan company funding, so students can get the student loan company funding like other places can. We do have some courses that are about 4 or 5 months long. They're super intensive courses. The students are in 40 hours a week in the Escape Studios part. These are not degree courses. They are eligible for career development loans. Yeah, that's how it's funded.
Okay. Well, our online viewer is desperate to go out and get their Costa coffee and be seen to be living the full online experience, so we'd better let them go. Can I ask you to join me in thanking our speakers and contributors today? You'll find coffee back downstairs. All of this session will be edited and you'll be sent details of how to access it. As participants, you're free to use it in management training, circulate it to colleagues, etc., and stimulate and disseminate as much debate as possible. But I think we've heard some very interesting indicators of change that's coming, pressure from the outside and innovation from the inside, and some of the entrepreneurs who want to stand separately and create perhaps an economy around colleges and things. So thanks very much, and we're back here in, I think, 20 minutes.
Oh, I see.
But a lot of them have to do with education, public and private.
By doing it at others' expense.
So actually you look for the student graduates.
No, it's more senior executives. Within universities, private institutions. Done a lot of work in Switzerland, but not when I was in education, or when I was doing work with Nestle in the branches.
I understand. So your customers are schools?
They're schools, universities, they're all We'll make a start to this second session in the programme on the future of business education in the UK, and looking at slightly different angles. We had a very, I thought, interesting session covering some of the new entrants in the market, some of the views of what the HR and personal development world thinks. But there are a great many other themes. The UK business schools and business education is perceived to have a significant cultural and education advantage. Certainly when you speak to the French and various others, they complain bitterly about the unfair advantages that is perceived. But nonetheless, we heard about the various generations of young students coming through, many of whom are not entirely enthralled with the performance of business in general, the business models, and they have expectations. On top of that, companies are beginning to realize that the bottom line can't just be calculated in simple pounds, shillings, dollars, or whatever currency. And they're beginning to realize that they have to respond, and therefore business education needs to respond. So having searched the whole world, we landed upon Oliver, who is the Associate Dean at the Business School at Lausanne in Switzerland. I'm very much looking forward to his comments. Before he starts, I have to say hello to, or what they call in the online world, give a shout out to, is that the correct terminology? To Max Schachener, who is watching in the Austrian Danube Valley. And I'm told that he's invited us to a conference, which was very exciting. And then I was told that the conference is in Liverpool. So with that international global audience, Oliver, over to you.
Thank you very much, Neil. It's a pleasure to be here. As Neil just introduced, I work at a business school in Lausanne. BSL is a school that has existed for 29 years. It's a very small school in comparison to the majority of business schools or business programs represented here. What makes our school special is that it follows a niche in the market, that is, students interested in understanding how businesses convert to becoming more sustainable. All the programs from the bachelor to the doctorate, including our executive and executive MBA programs, include the values of sustainability, responsibility, and ethics in their teaching. That means that in every single course, whether it's accounting or management strategy, every single professor includes a consideration of their particular subject in light of the values and objectives of sustainability. So my presentation is going to be about the options open and available to schools, but also a proposal to you, or a think piece to you, to take home and perhaps read up on. I have written a short paper, a discussion paper, which I think will be made available. I welcome your comments, ideas, or criticisms. Do take a look at it. It's only 8 pages long. I do intend to follow up with this topic because I personally believe that education, regardless at what level, is always laden with values, whether we like it or not. As academics, we like to think that we are objective, that we know how to interpret data from a neutral perspective, that we understand the difference between beliefs and facts. And in fact, the moment we stand in front of a class of students, we actually represent values and assumptions. And I'd like to point these out. We have a PowerPoint slide that I prepared. So what I will briefly talk about, this is a short presentation, but I welcome your questions afterwards, is what does it mean when we prepare students for their careers? How do we talk about values in teaching and in research? And essentially, I'm asking here, what is the future work environment? Can we know it? How can higher education institutions prepare students for it? And must higher education institutions change the way they operate in order to prepare or better prepare their students? So the first part is, I'd like to say, and what I will do is I will go back to the first page so that you will not read while I talk. There's always a dilemma with PowerPoint slides, is that everybody loves PowerPoint because it acts like a guide, but then everybody in the audience reads the slides and forgets to listen. As I said, higher education is value-laden, like education anywhere. We educate and instruct on the basis of judgments, of injunctions, and of beliefs. Values such as trust. The students trust a teacher. Knowledge is precious. Or that if you work hard and make great effort, it will pay off when done with knowledge. Those are values, those are assumptions we have that underlie why we even go to school or choose to go to continuing education. More responsible decision-making is essentially what all schools want to encourage. If you read the mission statements, the value statements of almost any school today, it is creating new knowledge, helping students become better citizens, all of those lofty statements, and then you ask, well, what does the school really do to live those values on a day-to-day basis? The new work environment that we discussed earlier on, the rapidly changing environment because of technology, because of globalization, has an impact on how students think about their careers. And so inevitably, schools try to catch up or become irrelevant to the students. But catching up means just that. You're always limping behind the actual industrial evolution. And I think young entrepreneurs like Chris know that very well. If you don't go ahead yourself and try something, you will fall behind.
back to my slide. Essentially, we need to acknowledge that we work with assumptions that are based on values, but they also express needs. So we do assume, and we do believe that higher education influences the way students will behave in their careers. Almost every school professes that it will support the students in their professional lives by preparing them better. Thus, schools influence how graduates will act when they are professionals. Meaning that institutions want their graduates not only to be successful, but also to live the values they adopt at that school where they were. All students in higher education, in order to enter into their professional careers, that will allow them to develop a quality of personal lives. Students want to improve the quality of their own lives and of that of their communities. They want meaning. So learning at schools for students, and we've done some research on that, which is in the paper I prepared, students want meaning, not just technical skills. And it's the same for employers. Employers, we asked that will employ graduates, young people from master's degrees, bachelor degrees, or MBAs. They want to see their young employees or their new employees come with the right attitude, come with the skills of team building, emotional intelligence, meaning they can motivate others, they can overcome failures and crises with a smile and move up and move on. Those are the skills employers are looking for. Technical skills, the employees will adapt and learn as they move on. So it's clear that I come to another set of assumptions here. Because of the fast change in industry and job environment, as I said, employers want the right skills and attitudes. And higher education schools can, in fact, incorporate these soft skills, this teaching, in their programs and disciplines. This is what we are working at in our school. It's not an easy matter, and by all means, it's not simple. And I liked what you said earlier about soft skills actually being hard skills. I quite agree in the sense that the people skills for anyone who wants to work in society are crucial, are so important when you develop partnerships, when you develop relationships with customers or with suppliers in a supply chain. So how can schools embark on this change process within themselves? And we have found 3 areas where schools can and do change. The first one is that schools themselves must set the example. It's not do as I say, don't do as I do. It is do as I do. Students observe how their university or their business school actually operates. And the more a school is transparent and explains its own successes and failures to the students, as a case study, for example, the more the students are able to see that learning is a process that has its downs and its ups. And schools are actors in society that can show an example of what it means to be a responsible actor. Whether it's a for-profit school, a non-profit school, such as ours where I work, or a public school. Schools also can focus more on the careers that the students are looking for and their employability. And we heard a good example before of the Pearson's College. There are many different models of teaching, of organizing seminars and workshops that involve industry leaders, that involve employers, and that involve experts from industry, but also from the non-profit sector, where we in Switzerland are very strongly engaged with. And the third area of focus is research and innovation. And this is where many universities find the largest stumbling block, because professors, especially on tenure, are free to research the area they wish to research in. And a school cannot easily tell a professor, now, although you research the interface between technology and automation, you now must introduce ethics, please, or responsible action, or sustainability. And many, many professors will say, that's not my area. Ask an ethics professor to do that. But universities can provide incentives of all sorts, even to tenured faculty, to encourage them to, in the classroom, allow students and help students to understand that although their field of research is terribly specialized, there is always a link to be found between that specialization and responsible management, sustainability, ethics, and diversity in society. So it's not obliging the professors and researchers to change their research. That's not the point. But the point is to help them bring considerations of these important values into the teaching, and possibly into their research publications as well. And universities can provide incentives for that. So here I'm in this slide briefly repeating what I just said. Institutional management should set a best practice example. Pedagogical innovation to integrate the school's values in all classes and programs across every discipline is possible. Even an accounting professor or a chemistry professor or a strategy professor, more likely than others perhaps, can present the students with ethical dilemmas in their specific area of specialization, and thus increase awareness among the students of what it means to interact with these soft skills. And a school can provide incentives for faculty and researchers to consider their specialty in light of these values. Instead of pretending that academia works outside of the field of values, it's much more intelligent to admit that all research, all teaching is done with values either expressed or unexpressed, and to see how the interaction happens and how that encourages the learning process. This is my concluding slide. Universities, higher education institutions, business schools can focus on setting a best practice example. They should, I believe. They can integrate EDRS, ethics, diversity, responsibility, sustainability in all programs and in their teaching pedagogy. And they can incentivize their professors and researchers and academics to consider their work in light of the values the school wishes to promote. They can, of course, be other values too. I will leave it at that. Questions are welcome.
Okay. I'm very struck by two things, the sort of feedback that I get in doing these events. One, around business studies and management. And there was a small rebellion in Manchester, I think, where the economics students and others who were doing the business courses were not happy that there was no discussion of what had gone wrong in the crash of 2008, to which the reply they received was, we haven't made our mind up and agreed on the research, and we'll teach it when we have agreed. And then the second thing was just wondering about whether or not anybody from Volkswagen ever went on your course before they thought it was a clever idea to game the emissions and other computing data on their cars. Because it seems to me that these provide huge examples of very serious failures which actually hit the bottom line. So it's not just a good and worthy thing to do, but it has a clear impact on what happens in business. How are these things discussed amongst your students, and how do you engage them with these dilemmas?
They are discussed amongst our students. The Volkswagen case is, of course, concerns a neighboring country.
but it's a case that is having an impact. The way professors pick it up, and the way I encourage professors to pick it up, is to see an event as that, as a potential case study, and to try to understand what were the interests behind the development of the software in these cars, but also what does a company do then, or the mistakes a company makes, to either hide or repair what it is engaged in. It's true that it always takes a bit of time before professors and teachers can pick up a current story that's in the news and discuss it in class, especially if a teacher or an instructor worries that he or she might not have the correct information and that therefore they had better wait a few years before enough research was done. But students do not want to wait. And it makes sense in classes where a discussion is possible that professors actually engage the students in such discussions. And in my point of view, there is nothing wrong when a professor says, I don't know the answer. In fact, if the professor says, I don't know, but let's spend half an hour searching, everybody open your computers, let's look for X, Y, and Z. Half an hour later, you'll have 20 or 30 students having their hands up because they discovered something. So a teacher can encourage an open discussion in class and admit that he or she doesn't have the answer.
Okay, Ray, would you just like to say who you are?
When you talk about academics embracing the values of their institution and their programs, do you think there's perhaps a tension that the allegiance of academics very often, and probably particularly professors, is not often necessarily to their institution, it's to their own disciplinary community of practice, it's to their own sort of guild, as it were, which is often an international community and probably where their next job is coming from. And very often the values of those communities are sometimes in tension with the institution that actually employs them, of course, which makes them very difficult kinds of institutions to manage. They're very unruly places. How do you get around that?
Mm-hmm. There definitely is a tension, you are right. I have often had to sit down with a professor myself and help him or her imagine that even though their specialism, their focus of their research is in one particular area that seems so far away from any values, to actually have them think about the assumptions they're working on, even in their research. And so far, I've always succeeded in getting them to admit that, in fact, there are some assumptions and values that are underlying the work they do, even though they never speak about them. But the more importantly to me is not to have the professor or the academic change what they're researching. That's their right to decide what they wish to research in. But it is to help them change the way they teach by encouraging them more workshop style of teaching, for example, encouraging them to engage students in team-based learning projects where you get the students to work together as small groups. This works even in large amphitheater lecture halls where the students begin to have to ask each other questions and then evaluate as peers how they answer each other's questions. Get that debate flowing. And actually, the professors themselves come back to me and said, I had the most enriching class last semester. I learned more than I think the students did. Because it's through the discussion with all these young brains sitting in the classroom that the professor also learns. That is so precious. And what I always tell the students when they first come to the school is I say, this is a learning organization. Don't expect our school to be perfect. We make mistakes like any organization does. Be here as a student and contribute to the learning of everybody. And the students actually appreciate the honesty. They come back later on and they say, I think you made a big mistake there. You should change how you do that. And I tell them, thank you. We will do our best.
Okay. Question, contribution front.
Thank you. Hello, my name's Lucy Melville. I work for a Swiss academic publisher. I'm very interested in your talking about EDRS and particularly, obviously, as an academic publisher, how we can embed that in our publishing. But I wanted to ask you, whose ethics are we talking about? Where we have these conflicts in an increasingly global world with all sorts of economies waning, growing, different religious, societal pressures, what can we embed in the pedagogy you mention that will speak to us all universally?
Good question. I work at an international school. 90% of our students are not Swiss. They come from all parts of the world and all religious backgrounds. I have never had a student who has come to me to complain that the values we stand for as a school do not match their background or their particular sense of what is right and wrong. I think the way we may overcome such complaint is that we ask all the professors to use case studies in their teaching. And then to offer the students the opportunity not just simply to answer a case study questions as they are published, but also to think about the problems that a case study shows in light of the values they consider precious. So it's not that we dictate ethics is this and not that. It is think of the values you live with and then decide whether what you have just studied made sense or whether you thought it was wrong. And can you explain it?
Okay. Again, you can say where you're from and who.
Right, I'm Christine O'Leary. I'm from Sheffield Hallam University, Sheffield Business School. I was particularly interested in your presentation. We are a very large business school and we've just been in the process in the last 2 years of embedding the principle of responsible management education in all our curriculum, that's undergraduate and postgraduate. But we've also got a lot of sandwich courses. And how do you deal with any tensions with business partners in terms of these values of responsible management? Because that's something that we're grappling with.
Sandwich courses, work placements.
Yes.
Is that a Swiss word, sandwich course?
No, it's not a Swiss word.
No, right. Basically, the students do 3 years at the university, and in their third year, they actually do a placement.
Yes, I understand. Yes.
In a business. But that's not compulsory, although it is in some courses. So obviously, when they are working in the business, there may be tensions in terms of the values of that business or the practices.
Right.
And they may. So how would you deal with the tensions, or do you not come across that in your own practice?
I have, in the 4 years I've been at Business School Lausanne, I've never had an employer tell me that the student is living the wrong values. Employers hire the graduates who they find most appropriate for the position they have. And whether a student then, or a former student, then continues to live the same values on a daily basis on their job is up to the student's own conscience. My conscience at school is to give them the best opportunity to think about how their own values can be lived in a professional environment on a daily basis. That's what I'm interested in. I don't want to hide and pretend that we can live value-free, but I don't want to tell a student what the values are they must live by. Teaching responsible decision-making inevitably is not merely just teaching critical thinking. It's actually teaching through models, through simulations, case studies, examples. We bring in a lot of professionals into the seminars who talk about their own experience at work, is to help students understand that if they need to make a difficult decision, they ought to try to think about the effects their decisions will have. To me, that is being responsible.
I meant on the business side, so not the students going in with certain values, ethical values, and finding that the practices of the business they're doing their work experience in are quite different. So it's reconciling that.
I'm not so sure exactly what your question then is. The tension you mean is more within the employer.
That's, well, if you like, the students learning from practices that may be not so ethical within the business itself.
Yes?
To give an example, the person works at FIFA.
Yes.
In the last year. Give you a local example.
We do. In fact, we had a professor who came from FIFA to teach with us.
Okay.
A project manager from FIFA. Employers, again, hire the students they find are most appropriate for the jobs they have. Whether the employer then feels there's a tension between... I have difficulty answering this question because I'm not sure exactly. I cannot speak for the employer. Most employers claim that their organization stands by values. And usually I haven't seen a contradiction. I haven't seen an employer saying, we don't believe in responsible management. So what then happens within the organization where a graduate may go to work to, that's not under my control, and probably the employer might be rather embarrassed about it as well. When it is.
Okay. Okay, well, a clash of values might be quite a good segue into Sarah Hardcastle, who is a consultant with Carrington Crisp. Because the other variable in all of this, we've been hearing about how the academics and the business studies community are trying to rethink how they do their courses. But of course, students are exercising their values when they choose courses. And we've heard about some of the values that they're bringing, and much more challenging, different sets of expectations. And of all the different variables that could suddenly alter how universities and colleges prosper or not, the one that's been the sort of sleeping giant has been student behaviour and choice, which has remained very robust, very willing to pay fees, but every other survey tells us that their values are burbling away in different directions. So we thought we would ask Sarah to give us an insight into what the students want, what they expect, and is there a disconnect in any of that you can see coming over the horizon?
Thank you very much. So, I'm Sarah Hardcastle from Carrington Crisp. I'm here to talk to you about tomorrow's student. I have the honour, or perhaps some would say the dubious honour, of spending a large percentage of my life talking to prospective and current students, to faculty and professional staff, to alumni and to employers via one-on-one interviews, focus groups, and listening to their views that come in via anonymous surveys. I'm here to talk to you today about 5 key trends. So, who is a student and where might they come from? This is with a particular focus on the business school arena. Expectations from the student experience, especially with the increase in fees, and perhaps especially with the increase of parental influence. The demand for soft skills, as we've heard earlier. Knowledge is everywhere, but to learn to lead, to motivate, to manage, to network, to negotiate, these are all things that are very valuable, but also transferable. And flexibility is key. We think students are going to want to dip in and out of learning, and refer to it as lifestyle learning, and throughout their careers as they hit different challenges, and we'll come on to more about that in a minute. And it is career. There's a huge focus on outcome, and we see up to 1/3 of MBAs wanting to run their own business now. So it's not necessarily the traditional careers of the past. So the traditional 3-year degree with an 18-year-old student, well, it still has a future, but perhaps that student isn't going to be on campus for the whole of the time. And to have a sustainable supply of students we feel that business schools need to widen the net. They need to think about apprentice degrees, as we heard earlier. If I look just simply into my own family, my niece, definitely university material, deferred her place for a year. She now works for Transport for London. She's studying project management. She's gaining credits to complete her degree at the end of her apprenticeship. And that was very much a parental guided decision, because they didn't want her to have the amount of debt and because they did want her to have the work experience and the job in the end. And we think business schools for students also need to look across the university to students and to alumni of other faculties. Chemists, engineers, psychologists, all will need business skills. A lot of them will need business skills. And I have to say some, not all, but some business schools we see struggling to engage with their own alumni, let alone those from across the university. And more, there's a trend of the contact being about fundraising rather than anything else, rather than actually engaging with the alumni. And I did a call with an alumnus last year where they said to me, you know what, it's the first time they've asked my opinion, and you haven't asked for money at the end. Now that you have done that, next time they call, I will give money. And it is about engagement first, but alumni can give so much more than fundraising. In addition to that, business schools have to be prepared to support portfolio and contractor careers, and those that have hit the glass ceiling, and as we heard earlier, perhaps those wanting to change role or sector, or perhaps even country, needing new skills, needing new networks too. I spoke just this week to an Indian alumnus from an MBA programme in the UK, and she'd gone to work for a company and then gone to start her own business. By that point, she'd lost contact with her business school in the UK. Her loyalties were to there. She went to another local business school to get support with her business. And finally, international. The key to international student enrolments is to look where the middle class is developing. This is a map from the DUI created in 2013, looking at rapidly developing middle classes. Now, in the short term, you probably wouldn't want to visit some of these places on a recruitment drive, but medium term or longer term, perhaps that's going to be okay. And EY are forecasting that the middle class will grow hugely over the next 2 decades, and by 2030, 2/3 of the middle class will be in the Asia-Pacific region. Which brings me on to the point of diversity. We see some business schools fighting really hard to protect the diversity of their cohorts. And it is quite a struggle. We see some programmes where they're dominated by one nationality. And that means sometimes as bad as worse English when they go back home than they came to this country with. It means less learning across the cohort. It causes huge problems in group work. And it doesn't work for either side. It doesn't work for the majority nationality, and it doesn't work for the minorities either. And I think if this map is right, then business schools need to find a strategy to deal with this. We'll come on to a little bit more about that in a moment. And society has changed. We aren't audiences anymore, and I think these 2 pictures just say it all. We are stakeholders, we're content creators. And it's really important to get your story straight. It's really important to get the student experience straight. And we see a good web and digital presence as really key. But it's a balance between good design. I've seen a fantastic, beautiful business school website absolutely slated by students because they couldn't find the information quickly. And that's information like course, costs, and career. But more than that, people are wanting authentic information. So whereas in the past an anonymous story about a member of their alumni where they've gone to work just with an industry, it doesn't work anymore. They want specifics. Even better if you can get the alumnus to talk on video. But more than that, we're seeing a trend where prospective students actually want to talk to your alumni. And they've got access. That's the really scary thing. They can use social media for access, which makes the student experience even more important. This is from our Generation Web study, which we've been running for quite some years now. And in 2010, just 4% were using their smartphone as their main tool for going online. They'd perhaps have a quick look and then move to something else. In 2015, this rose to 61%, and I'm actually quite surprised it's as low as that. We've also seen a growth in students using social media to support their studies, and I think technology to support studies, rather than as the main means of delivering, is actually really important to them. Now, in a dark corner of your family, or maybe even of your home, you probably find one of these lurking somewhere. I'm not even sure they know I took their photograph yesterday. Fortunately, only one of them's mine. We've taken to texting when food's ready, because that's the only way to get attention, because they've got noise-cancelling headphones on all the time. The reason I'm introducing you to Zach and Joel is that we have seen increasing use of video downloads from websites, from university and business school websites. And they're 13. When they search, they don't go to Google, they go to YouTube first. And when I ask them why, they just look at me as if it's a no-brainer. Why read when you can watch? If they possibly can, they have their books on audio. Again, why read when you can listen? But also they can do something else at the same time. And it's not just the boys. There's this kind of, I think, stereotype that it is the boys. And it's not. The girls are pretty much as bad. And we're just beginning to see some innovative marketing. In particular, if you haven't seen it, I'd point out a video from BI Norwegian Business School called Flying Start. I don't know what it's done for them in terms of recruitment, but in terms of awareness, brand awareness, it's had 1.2 million views. How many of your marketing departments would not die to have something like that? So what do students value when they're making choices about where to study? Well, you'll be pleased to know it is still academic reputation. But I'm afraid academics have to be able to teach too. And it's not always my experience that they can. And it's going to be even more important with the introduction of TEF. And then overall brand and reputation. On the way in, it's what family and peers think about it, the people they talk to. On the way out, it's employers. Nobody wants to sit in an interview and explain where they studied and why they chose to study there. A focus group last year with an international student, she'd been accepted on 2 MBA programs in the UK. She chose the one that was, in her view, the poorer. Now, she didn't do that because of location or because of cost. She did it because of the overall reputation of the institution and of the business school, because she said to me, that's what stays on my CV. And finally, on this one, value for money. We hear time and again in focus groups, students talking about a cost versus rankings calculation. I hear questions about, is the student a customer? In my mind, it's why would you think that they're not a customer? It's one of the biggest purchases they'll make in their lives. And I think lots of us have probably had friends, I know certainly from my background in the city, I've had friends say to me, how much do I need to spend? How much can I get away with? Does it need to be there? Or actually, do I have to bite the bullet and can it be there? But we see more and more value judged on outcome. And we hear that they're prepared to pay more if the outcome is likely to be better. And while you really, really can't overpromise, what you can do is use stories of your alumni, real stories, real people. And not just the stars. Yes, the stars are important for brand building, But with the best will in the world, very few of us are going to end up working at Google or at Apple. So real stories of real people, of where they really might end up. And in terms of careers, what do they value with career outcome? Well, CVs and interviews at all levels. The number of times I have an email or a phone call from a friend saying, can you just look at this? Or how should I pitch this? But career support perhaps isn't going to be traditional. Perhaps it's not just the big job in a multinational company. I did an interview recently with a marketing director, a well-known communications brand. And it was a brand that, certainly at their age, I would have been proud to put on my CV. And she said, I can't get any interns. It's like, why not? They all want to work agency side. And it's causing us a problem. And it's understanding the aspirations of your students in terms of designing the career support that I think is really important. And business startup, not just startup support when they're studying or when they finish studying, but further down the line, and then growth support as well, and continuing that relationship so they can dip in and out of their studying. And real-world learning, time and again, we hear the added value of real-world learning, and we've heard a lot about it this afternoon already. They want to pitch for a real customer. They want to be able to make mistakes in a real environment, but mistakes that aren't going to affect their career. They want to work on a real project. And those business schools that give them that opportunity, the students really value it. My godson lectures at Brunel in computer game design. The number of internships available are tiny, and they really struggle with this, or they did. What they've done, it's a faculty initiative, is set up a computer game design agency using university facilities in the summer months. And that way, they give their students real work experience. And I think business schools perhaps needs to be a little more innovative about the businesses they can run from on campus. I know some do it, but there are lots that don't. And finally, I think where real-world learning is really critical is with international students. Certainly certain nationalities with the work-study visa situation, it needs to be part of programmes. Because if these international students come over here and their English doesn't improve, and they don't learn from a diversely international cohort, and they don't build a diversely international network, and they don't get any Western work experience, why are they going to come? And finally, specialisation. I think the way probably to demonstrate how people are craving skills for specific industries is to look at the MBA specialist marketplace. If we look here, MBAs on media, on aviation, sports and music management, and on space. And if you search for MBA, you also get the Lego Master Builder Academy for Lego Star Wars. We haven't yet found an MBA in Star Wars, but no doubt there will be one sometime in the future. And finally, this is from our Tomorrow's MBA study with 1,000 prospective MBAs. We've just published the report, the 2016 report. And skills they're looking for: leadership, critical thinking skills, entrepreneurial mindset, negotiation and communication leading the way. But we did have a little bit of a giggle here because judgment, intuition and self-awareness are in the bottom three, because clearly all prospective MBAs have that already. Moving on swiftly. So to sum up, what do we know about tomorrow's students? Well, they are going to be more diverse. Diverse in terms of age, in terms of experience and in terms of origin. And they're going to want flexibility to study around their lifestyles and to dip in and out. And what they want to learn is changing. Yes, it's knowledge. And yes, it's knowledge taught well. But also they can look some of that up. They do want to develop their soft skills, and they really want real-world experience. So they want this great academic experience, but they have this really strong driving focus on career, on an outcome. And that outcome is really part of a focus on return on investment, especially with growing fees. And looking at the postgraduate marketplace, we hear time and again, it's about me. It's my learning, it's my development, it's my investment in the future. It's my time for me. That's it. Thank you very much.
So, Mike, who's stepped in at the last minute because, in case I forgot to say it earlier, Bill Rammel is ill and had to give his apologies. So we've heard two sort of perspectives on change in the content and what business courses and others should teach, perhaps to meet the needs of society and also student expectations. And we've heard about student values, how they want to learn. You've been working on your reform project at London South Bank. Are you going to have to tear any of it up, or how do you react to these comments? How much on the ball do you think you are, or what do you take from this?
I'd rather hope I'm on the ball, but you could correct me. It's been fascinating to hear both views. I should just explain by way of preface, I've got a rather unusual entree into being a dean of a business school because I've been a legal academic for over 30 years. But actually that's been something of an advantage in two ways. One, it allows me to approach the thing with fresh eyes, if you like, and I don't have to necessarily pretend I know everything because I don't. But it means you question assumptions, that you know, long-held views. But also because there are lessons that you can transfer across from legal education. As one of my other roles, I chair the exam board for intending barristers for the Bar Standards Board. And we've had a big debate about the training of barristers and what form that should take. And there is a relevance for business schools because we began to unpick what the requirements should be. And the more we looked at it, the more we thought, do you know what? The content at undergraduate level really doesn't matter. We took a rather interesting approach and said, well, yeah, the people we put into this profession, how close are they to being able to kill someone if they get it wrong? Okay? And it's an interesting measure because you want your surgeon, okay, to be rigorously trained, have good eyesight and a steady hand, and to get it right. There's a lot riding on that. You rather hope your pilot has been rigorously trained and is not going to crash into the mountains, get the plane, you know, safely on the ground or whatever. Now, I'm not being utterly flippant about this. Clearly, with lawyers, there's loss of liberty and loss of livelihood, whatever. But you understand that the stakes go down a little bit, and it means you can relax a little bit about content. And to cut a long story short, we got to a point where we were thinking, well, actually, what we're looking for is a kind of graduateness, you know, a readiness to go on to a professional stage. Sure, there is now a very narrow core of legal knowledge that we'd want them to understand, but you don't have to have done employment law, you don't have to have done family law, because actually you'll have a bunch of skills that will allow you to develop in that area if you want to. The key to making that work was the amount of continuing professional development that went on once you were in a regulated profession. But it was very interesting to stand back and say, well, actually, we can relax about the content. And I think the significance of that point for business schools is that if you start relaxing about the content, and I know you've got ACCA requirements for accounting and finance, whatever, but if you start to relax about the content of it, you create the room to look at some of the more interesting things that we've been discussing. And you can then engage in a meaningful debate about, well, how do you develop these skills? How do you get this done? Which brings me back to another point about legal education. Because I was very fortunate when I did my law degree a million years ago, that I did it by simulation, which in the 70s was really cutting edge, okay? But we did everything by simulation. We were divided into firms of lawyers, and we were literally told, this is what's happened this week in your case. There's the library, go and find out. There was a very rude expression called FOFO, I think, which I won't decode for you. But that was the method of teaching. Don't ask us, there's a library over there. Go and find out. And they would literally, we'd get to the answer, and then they would change the facts. Say, your client's committed suicide. Get on with it. Now, what does all that mean? It makes you incredibly resourceful. Incredibly resourceful. It makes you kind of quite nimble in your thinking. By the time you graduate, boy, have you got a good practical education about how to do stuff, okay? And increasingly, you know, we're hearing about business schools engaging with this. In my own business school, we're developing a business solutions center, which is a complete rip-off of the legal advice center that I set up. It's the same principle. You get businesses coming in with their problems, staff and students advise them. Students get the opportunity to deal with live casework. There is no substitute for it, but it's scary. But that, I think, creates a number of challenges. And those challenges, I think, touch upon points that both our speakers have made. Turning to Olivia's issue about ethics and sustainability and so on, I think a real challenge there is that quite often academics will circle the wagons if they think someone is telling them what to do. And I absolutely buy into the comment that was made about the loyalty to the discipline. And in fact, you know, you can change my office, you can take away my parking space, but don't mess with my discipline. And don't tell me what should be on my syllabus, because that's academic freedom. And the danger is that a lot of well-meaning colleagues treat a syllabus as a Christmas tree on which they want to hang things. So, you know, a while back it was, you know, equality and diversity was, you know, the plat du jour, as it were. You had to have that on your syllabus somehow. And if you take the same approach to ethics and sustainability, even if it's a good thing, instinctively some people will say, I'm not going to do it because you're telling me to do it. This kind of intellectual shutters come down. So I do wonder if one of the ways to deal with that, if you can't win people's minds, sorry, if you can't win people's hearts, is to go for their minds and say, actually, this is about pragmatic capitalism. This is about not killing your customer, keeping them alive longer so you can sell them more stuff. And if we begin to think of it like that, we make it a slightly more secular approach, if you like. We're no longer the missionaries proselytizing for a particular view. We just say, this is utterly pragmatic, okay? And you know, if you run a more ethical business, actually you'll attract more investment, it'll be more cost effective, you'll have a fan base rather than customers. That in itself is more sustainable, and so on and so on. And it's that kind of thinking, I think, that we've got to bring in to our teaching and not make it an add-on and nice to have, but make it utterly pervasive in the way that we teach in business schools. A second challenge that comes out of that discussion, if you like, going back to learning by doing, is the tension between that and the continuing massification of higher education. Because whilst I refer to a golden era of learning by doing and teaching by simulation, how many students were there on my degree when I joined? There were 23 of us. I can remember the names of 11 staff, okay? Now, you know, do the maths. It was a different world in terms of the unit of resource. So there's a real challenge there in trying to have cost-effective, personalized education that involves a degree of learning by doing. And I think the work goes on in trying to square that circle. I think we've got a challenge around staffing in business schools. This is a bold generalization which won't apply everywhere, but I think there is a continuing tension in terms of what we look for when we recruit staff and what we then ask them to do once they've arrived. And I think the area where that is most apparent is where we talk about enterprise in business schools. How many staff are actually appointed because they really are enterprising? It's a rhetorical question. I don't know the answer. Do you know why I'm asking the question? Because the traditional academic career is going to be based in an awful lot of universities now around research. And I'm just beginning to wonder, this is a heresy, I know, but I'm just beginning to wonder about the value of the ref for some business schools, right? Just throw it out there about what the value of some of the research is, how much of it is actually picked up by industry, and how much of it is very inward-looking to get the next promotion to the next level of the academic career. And where does that leave the staff who are not research active? I think one of the tricks that a lot of business schools are missing is really valuing industry experience and allowing a proper degree of interchange between an academic career and an industry career. There's an awful lot of things that militate against that, and as a result, I think staff are in a poorer situation because they're less mobile in terms of their jobs. Some of them end up maybe unemployable, and students suffer because they don't necessarily get enough fresh thinking coming into the classroom. Two more, if I may, very briefly.
Very briefly.
Very briefly. The tension between training and higher education. That's been a little subtext that's run through some of the discussions we've heard today, a lot of what goes on in business schools, I think, is training. And I think there is a tension about dressing it up as higher education sometimes. Maybe we need to be more honest that this is actually training and this represents higher education. Otherwise, there's a little bit of confusion between the two. And finally, to pick up on Sarah's point about value for money, and I want to express this fairly graphically. Yes, I think students are customers in the broad sense. There's no doubt about that. It is a huge purchase, okay? And I do wonder what the impact will be over the next couple of years as older siblings open an envelope and show it to the younger siblings and say, that's how much I now owe, okay? It's gone up to £48,000 and rising. I haven't got a clue how I'm going to pay this off. Now, either we end up with a culture where the generation that's coming through say, 48,000, I don't give a damn. I'm not paying it back. In which case you have a public purse problem, okay? Or you have a younger generation saying, my goodness me, I never realized the debt would look like that. I'm going to have a bit of a rethink. Now, that's not just a challenge for business schools, but it's one we absolutely have to be aware of. And it comes back to what are we actually offering in terms of value for money. Sorry, Neil, that was too many points.
All right. Questions, contributions from the floor? People are... Okay, there's one in there. Sheffield.
Thank you very much for that intervention. I wanted to go back to the students as customers. And I think in the broad sense, I agree with you that they are customers because they're purchasing, you know, sort of their education. But in another sense, they're not, because obviously they've got to engage with their studies. And how do you reconcile that? And the fact that now we've got some evidence that the more the students see themselves as customers, the less likely they are to perform well in their studies. I know it's early days and it's small research, but you know there are some indication that this is the case.
I think the problem with the debate about students as customers is it sometimes tends to be rather binary. You know, they either are or they're not. And I think you're right to observe that it's not always like that. I think you have to look at the different ways in which students interact with the university. So if they are effectively buying accommodation from the university, are they customers? I think undoubtedly they are, okay? If they're buying catering in a refectory, are they customers? Yes, they are. And so you can go on and look at the types of interactions that students have with the university. So in terms of the hygiene and front of house factors, I think they definitely are customers. Classes should start when they're supposed to, okay? Staff should turn up and be appropriately qualified and so on and so on. But then you get into a slightly nuanced relationship where they move into being, we sometimes say partners in learning, but that's really a euphemism for saying, actually, you've got to do your bit. And to some extent, I still like the Weight Watchers analogy, which is not a bad one, actually, in the sense that you can say to them, look, we'll give you the tools, we'll give you the opportunity, we'll give you the support, but actually, you need to do it as well. You are investing in this as well. So I do believe students are customers. I don't think that guarantees them an outcome. And you've got to manage the relationship with the student from the beginning to say, there are certain aspects of this relationship where you are responsible, and you will get back from this what you put in.
Okay, question, comment at the front?
More of a comment rather than the question, if that's okay, but Richard Hewitt from the Spencer Group. Now, I'm a headhunter in higher education, and it just struck me that what you were saying about recruiting people into business schools and how enterprising they are. I recently recruited, relatively recently recruited, a director of a centre for entrepreneurship, and I was asked to find someone who was enterprising. It was more in the sense of enterprising in the way that they would run the centre, how they would raise funds, so the grant capture and consultancy, and have that balance. And obviously, as part of that, I spoke to a lot of people around the country who are in that part of the space. And what I found was really what you described. You had people who could contribute to REF and very certainly fantastic researchers, but in terms of being enterprising, the question was more, where's my core funding coming from?
Yes.
And how long's that guaranteed for? And if it's not in black and white, then forget it. Or you had those which were doing fantastic consulting work in the real world, but not getting any research done, and their careers therefore were coming into difficulty. And yes, in the end, we were able to find someone who had that balance, but really is a handful of people in the country who could really fulfill that mix. And so it's just interesting that you were saying the same, because that's exactly what I found in the market.
Yeah, and
Ray?
sorry.
No, Ray, you want to?
Just coming back to the point about customer-client relationships and so on. Yes, you can. Students can buy accommodation, they can buy catering. They can't buy personal transformation. You know, you can't commodify that.
Co-production.
So I think that does change the game. However, I think a compounding factor is the current quality regimes we have at the moment tend to measure satisfaction. They measure customer satisfaction. So the NSS is a classic example. It's basically asking, are you happy all the time? And as we all know with assessment, assessment is where student anxiety clusters. You know, they're always going to be anxious about that. They're never going to say, yes, I'm 100%, happy about that. In the States, for example, the National Survey of Student Engagement doesn't ask, are you happy? It asks, how do you spend your time? What do you do during the week? How much of this do you do? How many hours of that do you do? That's fabulous data. We now have data on nearly 4 million students in the States. And that's really useful data in terms of indicating what are very effective measures in that sense. So I think, it's not just are they customers, it's why are we continually asking, are they happy as customers? We should be asking, we want them to be happy and satisfied, of course, but we should be asking them other useful things as well. And the NSSE can measure from all that data what they call high impact measures, the things that really do seem to make a difference in very specific areas, like mature Hispanic women or young black men and so on. Different interventions with different groups, different initiatives seem to have effects. We don't have any of that data at all. We just have every year.
Well, that quality data is about to hit with Mrs. May's most recent initiative. Okay, unless there are any other questions or contributions, I'd like to... Oh, there is one at the front.
Hi, Paul Bangal. Just a very quick one on the enterprise, just going back to enterprise, is having worked at several business schools in the area of enterprise, my solution would be, if I was hiring, is to hire part-time staff, not full-time, in enterprise. It allows them to get on with their business. You can do a job share. The biggest problem we have in business schools is when you've got people with PhDs and professors in research, they've never taken any big risk. And when I say big risk, I mean with their own personal money, with their own savings, with their own income, taking out mortgages on their houses in order to start the business. That's some of the things that real entrepreneurs do, not publish papers. So my suggestion is take on part-time staff, but to manage the department, obviously you need somebody on a full-time basis. So that's basically what I would do if I was the dean of the business school now.
Okay. I think you might find quite a lot of people like that operating in the further education sector, but I won't start that war yet. Okay, I'd like to ask you to join me in thanking our speakers and contributors for their pieces this afternoon. And to say to you that there is a reception with drinks and things across in Brasenose College at the other side of Radcliffe Square, which I'm sure you'll be directed to by our many able assistants. If you've never been inside the college that gave us David Cameron, it's worth a visit, and it's a lovely place, and it starts as soon as we're finished here. And for those of you that are coming to the programme tomorrow, I look forward to seeing you then. And to our viewer from the Austrian Danube, thank you very much for watching, and you will be able to get this on demand within hopefully about a day or two, neatly edited and segmented for use in the short attention span world of the new students. So on that note, thanks very much, and the drinks are served over in Brasenose, and we'll see you tomorrow, those of you that are coming back. Thank you.